She lay down beside the child in the dark and drew her close and smiled. The child felt immediately, delightfully soothed, and then felt a sensation as if 2 needles ran into her breast, very deep. At the same moment, Le Fanu gives Laura the final word, and he gives it to her honestly. To this hour, the image of Carmilla returns to memory, with ambiguous alternations, sometimes the playful, languid, beautiful girl, sometimes the writhing thing glimpsed for a single moment in the ruined chapel, the beautiful face collapsed into something that had never been human at all. And often, from a reverie, Laura starts suddenly, certain, in the instant of waking, that she heard the light step of Carmilla at the drawing-room door. It does not open. She is not there. She is ash on the water, carried away and dissolved. This is documented. This is official. And still the step comes, delicate, unhurried, already inside the threshold of the mind. Some things, once let in, leave the shape of themselves behind, the exact shape of their absence, and the shape, Le Fanu understood, is permanent. Le Fanu published this in 1872 as part of a collection entitled In a Glass Darkly, 5 tales framed as case files recovered from the papers of a fictional occult physician named Dr. Hesselius. He wrote it in the last years of his life, largely a recluse in his Dublin townhouse, his wife long dead, his health failing, working only at night, a man who slept by day. I note that detail with the professional appreciation it deserves. Carmilla predates Bram Stoker's Dracula by 25 years. She was here first. She was in several respects considerably worse. The narrator is a young woman named Laura. She lives with her father in a remote Styrian schloss, a castle deep in the Austrian forest, 15 miles of woodland in every direction, the nearest neighbor a long day's ride away. Her life is very quiet, and she is lonely in the way that only the very sheltered truly understand loneliness. Then one moonlit night a carriage overturns outside her gate, and a beautiful young woman is left in her care. Her name is Carmilla. She keeps unusual hours. She whispers things that do not quite make sense. She has chosen Laura with great deliberation, though Laura will not understand this until very nearly the last possible moment. Before we open the record, if you find value in the dark archives, subscribe. New entries are added every Friday. The archive has been filing these documents for some time. It would be a shame to miss one. The archive notes, with characteristic restraint, that Laura found her absolutely delightful. What you are about to hear is the complete record, from the night of the carriage crash to the morning the grave was opened. It runs long. It earns every minute. Le Fanu does not rush toward the horror. He builds a world first, and then very quietly dismantles it from within, and by the time you understand precisely what has been happening, it has already been happening for some time. The archive recommends you settle in. This one does not release you easily. The record begins. In Styria, we, though by no means magnificent people, inhabit a castle, a schloss. My father is English, and I bear an English name, although I never saw England. He was in the Austrian service, retired upon a pension and his patrimony, and purchased this feudal residence, a bargain, standing on a slight eminence in a forest. The road, very old and narrow, passes in front of its drawbridge, its moat stocked with perch and sailed over by swans, its many-windowed front showing towers and a Gothic chapel over all. It is a very lonely place. The forest extends 15 miles to the right and 12 to the left. The nearest inhabited village is about 7 of your English miles away. And 3 miles westward lies a ruined village, with its quaint little church now roofless, where the mouldering tombs of the proud family of Karnstein, now extinct, stand in the thick of the forest above the silent ruins of their deserted town. Respecting the cause of that desertion, there is a legend which I shall relate to you another time. Our household was small. My father the kindest man on earth, but growing old, and I, at the date of my story, only 19. My mother, a Styrian lady, died in my infancy. I had a good-natured governess who had been with me from almost the beginning, Madame Perrodon. whose fat, benignant face had always been a familiar picture in my memory. There was a fourth at our table, Mademoiselle de La Fontaine, a finishing governess of metaphysical inclinations, who found spiritual significance in the behavior of the moon. These four constituted our world. My gouvernante had just so much control over me as you might expect in the case of a rather spoiled girl whose only parent allowed her pretty nearly her own way in everything. My life was, notwithstanding, rather a solitary one. I can assure you of that. The first occurrence in my existence which produced a terrible impression upon my mind, which has in fact never been effaced, was one of the very earliest incidents of my life I can recollect. I cannot have been more than 6 years old when one night I awoke and, looking round the room from my bed, failed to see the nursery maid. I was not frightened. I was one of those happy children studiously kept in ignorance of ghost stories and all such lore. I was merely vexed and began to whimper, when to my surprise I saw a solemn but very pretty face looking at me from the side of the bed, that of a young lady kneeling with her hands under the coverlet. She caressed me with her hands and lay down beside me and drew me toward her, smiling. I felt immediately delightfully soothed and fell asleep again. I was wakened by a sensation as if 2 needles ran into my breast very deep at the same moment, and I cried loudly. The lady started back with her eyes fixed on me, then slipped down upon the floor and hid herself under the bed. She could not be found. But the housekeeper whispered to the nurse, "Lay your hand along that hollow in the bed. Someone did lie there, so sure as you did not. The place is still warm." It was a sweet summer evening, some 13 years later, when my father received a letter from his old friend General Spielsdorf, explaining that the general's niece and ward, Mademoiselle Reinfeld, whom I'd so looked forward to meeting, had died. The letter was extraordinary and vehement, so nearly incoherent in its grief that I read it twice. "The fiend who betrayed our infatuated hospitality has done it all," the general wrote. "I thought I was receiving into my house innocence, gaiety, a charming companion for my lost Bertha. Heavens, what a fool have I been. I devote my remaining days to tracking and extinguishing a monster." We sat puzzling over those violent sentences in the cooling twilight, my father and I, as the moon climbed slowly above the tree line. And then came the sound of carriage wheels upon the road. 2 horsemen crossed the bridge first. Then came a carriage drawn by 4 horses, and 2 men rode behind. Just as it crested the steep bridge, one of the leaders took fright, and the whole team broke into a wild gallop and came thundering toward us with the speed of a hurricane. The carriage struck the projecting roots of the great lime tree at our gate and overturned. From the wreckage was lifted a young lady who appeared to be lifeless. Standing over her, tall, commanding, dressed entirely in black velvet with a proud and agitated countenance, was a woman who announced herself as the girl's mother. She was, she said, on a journey of vital importance that she could not delay. She could not remain. She beseeched my father to take the girl in. I plucked his coat and whispered earnestly, "Oh, Papa, pray ask her to let her stay with us. It would be so delightful." And so the bargain was struck. The mother drew her daughter close and whispered something, a benediction or perhaps instructions, in her ear. Then she stepped into her carriage, the door closed, the horses surged forward, and the whole equipage whirled away into the dark wood and was gone. The girl was young, perhaps my own age, slender and wonderfully graceful, with large, dark, lustrous eyes and a complexion rich and brilliant. Her hair was very dark brown with a faint thread of gold, and of such extraordinary thickness and length that when let down it was, all by itself, astonishing. I loved to let it fall, tumbling with its own weight, as she lay back in her chair talking in her sweet, low voice. She had been carried to a guest room in the Schloss. Later that night, after the physician had come and declared her recovered, I was permitted to visit her. I opened her door and stopped. I saw the very face which had visited me in my childhood, which remained so fixed in my memory, on which I had so often ruminated with horror when no one suspected what I was thinking. There was a silence of fully a minute. Then at length she spoke. "How wonderful!" she exclaimed. "12 years ago I saw your face in a dream, and it has haunted me ever since." And she told me. Her name was Carmilla. Next day came, and we met again. I was delighted with my companion in many respects. Her looks lost nothing in daylight. She was certainly the most beautiful creature I had ever seen. She confessed she had experienced a similar shock on first seeing me, and the same faint antipathy that had briefly mingled with my admiration of her. We laughed together over our momentary horrors, and yet she maintained a reserve I found quietly maddening. Her name was Carmilla. Her family was ancient and noble. Her home lay to the west. She would not name the family, the estate, or even the country. She deflected every question with so pretty a melancholy, and so many passionate declarations of her liking for me, but I could not long remain offended. What she did tell me amounted to nothing. First, her name was Carmilla. Second, her family was very ancient and noble. Third, her home lay in the direction of the west. She would tell me nothing more, and she seemed to find this entirely reasonable. And there were moments, particular moments, I could not account for at all. She would take my hand and hold it with a fond pressure, renewed again and again, gazing in my face with languid and burning eyes, breathing so fast that her dress rose and fell rapidly. She would draw me close and murmur in my ear, "Dearest, your little heart is wounded. Think me not cruel because I obey the irresistible law of my strength and weakness. In the rapture of my enormous humiliation, I live in your warm life, and you shall die, sweetly die, into mine." And when she had spoken such a rhapsody, she would press me more closely in her trembling embrace, and her lips, in soft kisses, gently glow upon my cheek. I felt something I could not name, a strange, tumultuous excitement, pleasurable, and mingled with vague fear and disgust. I experienced a love growing into adoration, and also abhorrence. I know this is paradox. I can make no other attempt to explain the feeling. Her murmured words sounded like a lullaby in my ear, and soothed my resistance into something very like a trance, from which I only seemed to recover when she withdrew her arms. In some respects, her habits were odd. She came down very late, generally not till 1 o'clock. She would take a cup of chocolate but eat nothing. We would then go out for a walk that was a mere saunter, and she seemed almost immediately exhausted. She was always an animated talker and very intelligent, and her conversation was full of glancing allusions to people and customs and adventures that implied a world far older and stranger than Styria. As we sat one afternoon under the trees, a funeral passed, that of a pretty young girl, the daughter of one of the forest rangers, the poor man walking behind the coffin quite heartbroken. I rose to mark my respect and joined in the hymn the peasants were sweetly singing. Carmilla shook me roughly, Don't you perceive how discordant that is?" I answered that I thought it very sweet. "You pierce my ears," said Carmilla, almost angrily. "Besides, how can you tell that your religion and mine are the same? Your forms wound me, and I hate funerals. What a fuss. Why, you must die. Everyone must die, and all are happier when they do." She sat down, and her face underwent a change that alarmed me. It darkened and became horribly livid, her teeth and hands clenched, and she trembled all over with a continued shudder as irrepressible as ague. A low, convulsive cry broke from her, and gradually the fit subsided. Hold me still," she said. "It is passing away." A wandering mountebank visited the Schloss that week, a hunchback with a pointed black beard. His costume crossed with more straps and belts than I could count, carrying a magic lantern, a fiddle, and 2 curious boxes said to contain a salamander and a mandrake. He danced in the courtyard and sang with ludicrous energy. "Will your ladyships be pleased to buy an amulet against the oupire?" he called up to our window, "which is going like the wolf through these woods. They are dying of it right and left, and here is a charm that never fails. Only pin to the pillow, and you may laugh in his face." Carmilla instantly purchased one, and so did I. He was peering upward with his sharp black eye, and suddenly fixed it on Carmilla with peculiar attention. "Your noble friend, the young lady at your right, has the sharpest tooth, long, thin, pointed, like an awl, like a needle. Now, if it happens to hurt the young lady, I can make it round and blunt, if her ladyship pleases." Carmilla drew back from the window, with a fury I had never seen in her before. A brutalized change in the features, but was itself more alarming than any anger. Her wrath subsided almost as quickly as it had risen. But I did not soon forget it. My father was out of spirits that same evening. There had been another case, very similar to the fatal ones preceding it. A young woman on his estate, attacked in the same mysterious way, now slowly and steadily sinking. "All this," said my father, "is strictly referable to natural causes. These poor people infect one another with their superstitions." Carmilla from the sofa replied, "I am so afraid of fancying I see such things. I think it would be as bad as reality." Later the doctor came and was closeted with my father for some time. I heard my father laugh as they emerged. "Well, I do wonder at a wise man like you. What do you say to hippogriffs and dragons?" The doctor shook his head. "Nevertheless, life and death are mysterious states, and we know little of the resources of either." And so they walked on, and I heard no more. I did not then know what the doctor had been suggesting, but I think I guess it now. That night I had a dream that was the beginning of a very strange agony. I cannot call it a nightmare, for I was quite conscious of being asleep. I saw something moving round the foot of the bed, a sooty black animal that resembled a monstrous cat, 4 or 5 feet long, pacing with the lithe, sinister restlessness of a beast in a cage. The room grew darker and darker, until I could see nothing but its eyes. I felt it spring lightly onto the bed, and suddenly I felt a stinging pain, as if 2 large needles darted an inch or 2 apart deep into my breast. I waked with a scream. The room was lighted by the candle that always burnt there through the night, and I saw a female figure standing at the foot of the bed, a little to the right, in a dark, loose dress, its hair down and covering its shoulders. A block of stone could not have been more still. There was not the slightest stir of respiration. As I stared at it, the figure appeared to change its place and was now nearer the door. Then, close to it, the door opened and it passed out. I hastened to the door. It was locked, as usual, on the inside. I sprang into my bed and covered my head in the bedclothes, and lay there more dead than alive until morning. The horror of that night did not diminish with morning. It seemed to deepen with time, and communicated itself to the room and the very furniture that had encompassed the apparition. I could not bear to be alone for a moment. I told Madame Perrodon and Mademoiselle de La Fontaine what lay so heavy at my heart. Mademoiselle laughed, but I fancied Madame looked anxious. "By the by," said Mademoiselle, "the long lime-tree walk behind Carmilla's bedroom window is haunted. Martin says he came up twice before sunrise and saw the same female figure walking down the avenue." I said she must not mention it to Carmilla, who could see down that walk from her room and was, if possible, a greater coward than I. When Carmilla came down that morning, she spoke first. "I was so frightened last night," she said. "I had a dream of something black coming round my bed. I awoke in a perfect horror. I really thought for some seconds I saw a dark figure near the chimney-piece, but I felt under my pillow for my charm, and the moment my fingers touched it, the figure disappeared." I told her my own adventure, at the recital of which she appeared horrified. She urged me earnestly to pin the charm to my pillow that night. I did so, and slept profoundly, and woke with a lassitude and melancholy that weighed upon me all day. I felt myself a changed girl. A strange melancholy was stealing over me, a melancholy that I would not have interrupted. Dim thoughts of death began to open, and an idea that I was slowly sinking took gentle, and somehow not unwelcome, possession of me. Carmilla became more devoted to me than ever, and her strange paroxysms of languid adoration more frequent. She used to gloat on me with increasing ardor, the more my strength and spirits waned. This always shocked me, like a momentary glare of insanity. Without knowing it, I was now in a pretty advanced stage of the strangest illness under which mortal ever suffered. Certain vague and strange sensations visited me in my sleep. A pleasant, peculiar, cold thrill, as of moving against the current of a river. Then dreams, interminable and vague, leaving only the impression of having been in a dark place, speaking to people I could not see. And then a sensation as if warm lips kissed me, longer and more lovingly as they reached my throat. But there the caress fixed itself. My heart beat faster. My breathing rose and fell rapidly. A sobbing that rose into strangulation supervened, and turned into a dreadful convulsion in which my senses left me and I became unconscious. It was now 3 weeks since the commencement of this state. I had grown pale, my eyes dilated and darkened underneath. I would not admit I was ill. I would not tell my father. The narcotic of an unsuspected influence was acting upon me, and my perceptions were benumbed. One night, instead of the voice I was accustomed to hear in the dark, I heard one sweet and tender and at the same time terrible, which said, "Your mother warns you to beware of the assassin." At the same moment a light sprang up, and I saw Carmilla standing near the foot of my bed in her white nightdress, bathed from her chin to her feet in one great stain of blood. I wakened with a shriek. I remember springing from my bed, and my next recollection is of standing on the lobby crying for help. We knocked at Carmilla's door. We pounded. We shrieked her name, all in vain. We forced the lock and stood holding our lights aloft in the doorway. The room was undisturbed. Everything was exactly as I had left it on bidding her good night. But Carmilla was gone. The whole household searched the castle through the following morning. Not a trace. The stream was about to be dragged. My father was in distraction. And then, at 1 o'clock, I ran up to Carmilla's room on an impulse and found her standing at her dressing table, beckoning me with her pretty finger in silence, her face expressing extreme fear. She had woken, she said, on the sofa of the inner dressing room, with both doors forced. No memory of having left her bed, no explanation for how she had passed through 2 locks that the servants had watched until morning. My father proposed somnambulism. My father laughed. I watched Carmilla's dark eyes follow him as he paced the room, a sly, slow glance that lasted precisely as long as she thought no one was looking. That same afternoon arrived the dark-faced son of the picture cleaner from Graz, with 2 large packing cases of restored portraits. Many of these pictures had come to us through my mother, who was of the old Hungarian family of Karnstein. The pictures were brought to light one by one. Then one was produced with particular pride, small, about 1.5 feet high, without a frame, the cleaning having revealed it entirely. It was quite beautiful. It was startling. It seemed to live. It was the effigy of Carmilla. "Carmilla, dear," I exclaimed. "Here is an absolute miracle. Here you are, living, smiling, ready to speak in this picture." The name in the corner, read clearly now, was not Marcia, as my father had first thought, but Mircalla, Countess Karnstein, and the date, AD 1698. "I am descended from the Karnsteins," I said. "That is, Mamma was." And Carmilla smiled, languid and radiant, gazing at me from across the room, and said only, "How interesting." That night, in the drawing room, we played cards pleasantly, and I accompanied Carmilla as usual to her room. She said to me, with a seriousness she did not always permit herself, "I am under vows, no none half so awfully, and I dare not tell my story yet, even to you. But the time is very near when you shall know everything. You must come with me, loving me, to death, or else hate me and still come with me, and hating me through death and after. There is no such word as indifference in my apathetic nature." She sank back on her pillow with her glittering eyes following me as I withdrew to the door. "Love will have its sacrifices," she whispered to the air. "No sacrifice without blood." I bid her good night and crept from the room with an uncomfortable sensation that did not leave me until morning, by which time, in fact, it had only deepened. Sicardo had summoned the doctor without telling me. He was the grave little physician with white hair and spectacles. I told him my story, and as I proceeded, he grew graver. He examined me and showed my father a small blue spot below my throat, about the size of the tip of a little finger. God bless me. "So it is," exclaimed my father, growing pale. "You see it now with your own eyes," said the doctor with a gloomy triumph. The doctor instructed that I was not to be alone for a single moment. He and my father paced the grounds afterward in earnest conversation I could not hear. 2 men who understood something and were afraid of it, and would not yet say what it was. A letter arrived from General Spielsdorf. My father looked as if he wished a general at the bottom of the Red Sea. He said only, "You shall know all about it in a day or 2. Then he ordered the carriage. We were going, he said, to the ruins of Karnstein. The drive was beautiful. Winding roads through soft wooded hills, the ground breaking into hollows and gentle rises. At one of those turns we came suddenly face to face with General Spielsdorf riding toward us. It was 10 months since we had seen him, and that time had done the work of years. He had grown thinner. Something of gloom and bitter anger had replaced the cordial serenity I remembered in his features. His dark blue eyes gleamed with a sterner light from under shaggy grey brows. He joined us in the carriage, and had barely settled before he began, with his usual soldierly directness, to speak of the bereavement he had sustained in the death of his beloved ward, and then broke out in a tone of intense fury against the hellish arts to which he had fallen victim. "I have been made the dupe of a preternatural conspiracy," he said. "I have strange things to tell you, such as I myself would have scouted as incredible a few months since." The general's story began at a magnificent masquerade held at Count Carlsfeld's Schloss in honor of the Grand Duke Charles. The grounds thrown open, the trees hung with colored lamps, fireworks that Paris itself had never witnessed, the finest musicians in Europe drifting from behind groves and boats on the lake. His ward, Bertha, was radiant that night. He noticed a young lady, magnificently dressed, masked, watching Bertha with extraordinary and particular interest. The young lady introduced herself to Bertha as Milaka, the daughter of an old acquaintance, and was witty and charming and deeply engaging. And when at last she lowered her mask, she displayed a remarkably beautiful face that Bertha had never seen before, and immediately could not do without. The elder lady, also masked, of commanding air, engaged the general himself in conversation, demonstrating an uncanny knowledge of events from his past life, and then declared she must depart urgently on a matter of life and death, and asked, with the manner of one conferring a favor rather than requesting one, that he take charge of her daughter during her absence. His ward entreated him. The beautiful face determined him. "Quite overpowered," he said. "I submitted and undertook too easily the care of the young lady whom her mother called Milaka." The mother's carriage vanished into the night, and Milaka came home with them. There soon appeared drawbacks. Milaka complained of extreme languor and never left her room until late afternoon. She was discovered to be absent from that room, door locked on the inside, in the very early morning, seen walking through the trees in an easterly direction, looking like a person in a trance. And then his ward, Bertha, began to lose her looks and health in a manner mysterious and horrible. She was visited first by appalling dreams, then by a spectre that sometimes resembled Milaka and sometimes a beast, walking round the foot of her bed. Then came the sensation of an icy stream against her breast, then something like 2 needles piercing her below the throat, then the convulsive sense of strangulation, then unconsciousness. The physicians were baffled. The doctor from Graz said he could not be mistaken. No natural disease exhibited these symptoms, and death was already very near. He left a sealed letter. Open it only in the presence of a clergyman. The general read it alone. It told him his ward was suffering the visits of a vampire. That night, hiding in the dark dressing room with his sword, he watched through the crevice until he saw a large black object crawl over the foot of the bed and swiftly spread itself to Bertha's throat, where it swelled into a great, palpitating mass. He sprang forward. The creature contracted, slid to the floor, and he saw Milaka. He struck at her with his sword. She stood unscathed by the door. He struck again. She was gone. His sword flew to shivers against the wood, and before morning dawned, Bertha was dead. By this time our carriage had reached the roofless chimneys and gables of the ruined village and the towers of the dismantled castle of Karnstein. We descended in silence and made our way up through the spacious chambers and dark corridors to the chapel below. The general seated me on a block of timber within the chapel walls and called to a woodman clearing growth from the old stones. The woodman could not identify the monuments, but directed us to a forest ranger who knew every Karnstein tomb. While we waited, my father asked how the village had come to be deserted. "It was troubled by revenants, sir," the woodman said. "Many graves opened, many vampires staked and beheaded and burned. But the village was not relieved until a Moravian nobleman passed through who knew such affairs. He watched from the chapel tower at moonrise until he saw a vampire leave its grave, then lured it back to the battlements and split its skull. This nobleman had also been given authority to remove the tomb of Mircalla, Countess Karnstein, which he did so effectually, but in a little while its very site was forgotten. Not a soul living, the woodman said, could tell you where it stood." He dropped his axe and left. And in the silence of the ruined chapel, as the general gathered himself to close his terrible story, I heard Madame's voice and Carmilla's approaching from beyond the archway. I looked up, and through the Gothic doorway, under its carved grotesques, I saw Carmilla enter the shadow of the chapel. I was about to rise and speak. I nodded and smiled, and then, with a cry, the general caught up the woodman's hatchet and started forward. On seeing him, a brutalized change came over Carmilla's features, an instantaneous and horrible transformation, crouching, savage. She dived beneath his blow, caught his wrist in her tiny grasp with a strength of forged steel, and the axe fell to the ground. He staggered against the wall, and the girl was gone. Madame stood in the passage, insisting that Carmilla had not passed her. The general looked at me with eyes still bright with terror. "That is Milaka," he said. "That is the same person who long ago was called Mircalla, Countess Karnstein. Depart from this accursed ground, my poor child, as quickly as you can. You will not find her here." My father led me from the chapel and collected the good priest from a house nearby, and I was glad of the support, being unspeakably fatigued when we reached home. But my relief was changed to dismay on discovering that there were no tidings of Carmilla. Of what had occurred in the ruined chapel no explanation was offered to me, and it was clear this was a secret my father for the present determined to keep. That night, the arrangements were singular. 2 servants and Madame sat up in my room, while the priest and my father kept watch in the adjoining dressing room. The priest performed certain solemn rites, whose purport I did not understand. I saw all clearly a few days later, but this appearance of Carmilla was followed immediately by the discontinuance of my nightly sufferings. The thing that had been visiting me in the dark was gone, and gone with it, as if by the same mechanism, was a sweet peculiar languor, the dim thoughts of death, the sense of sinking, but I had come without knowing it to almost welcome. I had not understood how thoroughly it had possessed me until it was removed, and I was left feeling scraped clean and frightened at how far I had drifted. The next day the formal proceedings took place in the chapel of Karnstein. The grave of the Countess Mircalla was opened. My father and the general each recognized, in the face now disclosed to view, the guest who had so recently deceived them both. The features, though 150 years had passed since her funeral, were tinted with the warmth of life. Her eyes were open. No cadaverous smell exhaled from the coffin. The medical men attested that there was a faint but appreciable respiration and a corresponding action of the heart. The limbs were perfectly flexible, the flesh elastic. The leaden coffin floated with blood. To a depth of 7 inches, the body lay immersed. Here were all the admitted signs and proofs. The body was therefore raised in accordance with ancient practice, and a sharp stake driven through the heart of the vampire, who uttered a "Rah!" at the moment in all respects such as might escape from a living person in the last agony. Then the head was struck off, and a torrent of blood flowed from the severed neck. The body and head were placed on a pile of wood, reduced to ashes, and the ashes were thrown upon the river and borne away. That territory has never since been troubled by such a visitation.
I write all this, you suppose, with composure. Far from it. I cannot think of it without agitation. Nothing but the earnest desire so repeatedly expressed could have induced me to sit down to a task that has unstrung my nerves for months, and re-induced a shadow of the unspeakable horror which, years after my deliverance, continued to make my days and nights dreadful, and solitude insupportably terrific. Let me add a word or two about that quaint Baron Vordenberg, to whose curious learning we were indebted for the discovery of Mercala's grave. He had taken up residence in Graz, living upon a mere pittance, all that remained of his family's once princely estates, devoting himself entirely to the investigation of the authenticated tradition of vampirism. He had, at his fingertips, all the great and obscure works upon the subject, and a voluminous digest of all the judicial cases, from which he had extracted a system of principles but appear to govern the condition of the vampire. The Baron explained certain matters that the archive finds worth recording precisely. The deadly pallor, attributed to such revenants in common legend, he told us, is a mere melodramatic fiction. In the grave and in human society alike, they present the appearance of perfect health, as anyone who had spent an evening with Carmilla would readily confirm. The vampire is sustained by daily renewed slumber in the grave, and by its nightly consumption of living blood. It is, the Baron noted, prone to become fascinated with engrossing vehemence, resembling the passion of love, by particular persons. In pursuit of these, it will exercise inexhaustible patience and stratagem, and will never desist until it has drained the very life of its coveted victim. But it will, in these cases, husband and protract its murderous enjoyment with the refinement of an epicure, and heighten it by the gradual approaches of an artful courtship. In these cases, it seems to yearn for something like sympathy and consent. The archive observes that Carmilla asked for both, repeatedly, in language that only made sense once you understood what she was asking you to consent to. The Baron also revealed the remarkable history of the tomb's concealment. My father asked how he had discovered the exact position of the long-lost monument. The Baron's grotesque features puckered into a mysterious smile. He fumbled with his spectacle case. Then he said, "I have many journals and papers written by a remarkable man. In very early youth, he had been a passionate and favored lover of the beautiful Mercala, Countess Karnstein. Her early death plunged him into inconsolable grief. In the course of his studies, he discovered what she had become, and conceived a horror of her remains being profaned by posthumous execution. He adopted the stratagem of a pretended removal of her remains, and a real obliteration of her monument to protect her." The Baron paused. When age had stolen upon him, and from the veil of years he looked back on the scenes he was leaving, he considered in a different spirit what he had done, and a horror took possession of him. He made the tracings and notes which guided me to the very spot, and drew up a confession. Death prevented any further action on his part, and the hand of a remote descendant has, too late for many, directed the pursuit to the lair of the beast.
The Baron said one more thing that the archive will not omit. One sign of the vampire is the power of the hand. The slender hand of Mircalla closed like a vice of steel on the general's wrist when he raised the hatchet. But its power is not confined to its grasp. It leaves a numbness in the limb it seizes, which is slowly, if ever, recovered from. The general, who had been listening quietly, turned his wrist over in the lamplight and said nothing. The following spring, my father took me on a tour through Italy. We remained away for more than a year. It was long before the terror of recent events subsided, and longer still before I ceased to wake in the night from dreams I could not entirely recall. I recovered. I was fortunate. Others were not. At dusk hour, the image of Carmilla returns to memory with ambiguous alternations. Sometimes the playful, languid, beautiful girl who pressed my hand and kissed my cheek and whispered things I did not understand. Sometimes the writhing thing I glimpsed for a single moment in the ruined chapel. The beautiful face collapsed into something that had never been human at all. And often from a reverie, I have started suddenly, certain in the instant of waking, but I heard the light step of Carmilla at the drawing-room door. It does not open. She is not there. She is ash on the water, carried away and dissolved. I know this. I have read the report with the signatures of the commissioners in my father's desk. She is gone. And yet the sound of that step persists, delicate, unhurried, already inside the threshold of the mind. And I think Le Fanu understood when he gave his narrator these final sentences. But this is the most honest thing that can be said about survival. But what visited you leaves a shape behind, the exact shape of its absence, and that the shape is permanent. The record is complete, filed and sealed. The ashes were thrown upon the river and borne away. The Imperial Commission submitted its report. The signatures of all present are attached in verification. The territory has not been troubled since. By every official measure, the case is closed. And yet, Le Fanu gives Laura the final word, and he gives it to her honestly. To this hour, the image of Carmilla returns to memory, with ambiguous alternations, sometimes the playful, languid, beautiful girl, sometimes the writhing thing glimpsed for a single moment in the ruined chapel. The beautiful face collapsed into something that had never been human at all. And often, from a reverie, Laura starts suddenly, certain, in the instant of waking, that she heard the light step of Carmilla at the drawing-room door. It does not open. She is not there. She is ash on the water, carried away and dissolved. This is documented. This is official. And still the step comes, delicate, unhurried, already inside the threshold of the mind. Some things, once let in, leave the shape of themselves behind, the exact shape of their absence, and the shape, Le Fanu understood, is permanent. If this record earned its place in your evening, the like button is how you tell the archive it mattered. Before you go, a question worth sitting with. Laura describes Carmilla in ambiguous alternations, the beautiful girl she loved, and the thing she glimpsed at the end. Which version do you believe was the performance, and which was real? Leave your answer below. The archive keeps all records. New entries added to the Dark Archives every Friday. Subscribe. No record should go unwitnessed. Until next time, the archives remain open.